Hello, everyone. Really excited to go over this training today on Bracing for Impact. We'll be talking about fundraising through election season. This is part one of a two-part series. This course will go over how do we prepare for different scenarios and fundraising through election season. And then part two will be some live case studies where we're gonna invite some folks who have done this work um, to be able to share insights with you all and figure out what is best practices and lessons learned. Um, my name is Kafili Thomas, he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Program Partnerships here at Progressive Multiplier Fund. I am joined by my amazing colleague, Janet Davison. Janet, do you want to say hi real quick?
Hi, y'all.
Thanks, Janet. And yeah, this is the team. A little bit more about who Progressive Multiplier is as an organization. So our goals are to help build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. And we do this by organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earn revenue programs through an online community of practice and our grant making and support program. We build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that it may amplify a people-powered movement. Um, so in addition to the strategic assistance and trainings that we provide, we also provide grants in these three focus areas. And our goal with our grants is to increase the revenue generation capacity of organizations that are doing work at scale to be able to create change and sustain change that we want to see in our country. Uh, a huge shout out to our partners at Resilience Initiative for putting this training together with us. I'm really excited to dive deep on this today. I think it's a super relevant topic and one that a lot of groups are still trying to figure out. So if you haven't had a chance to already, please introduce yourself in the chat, name, org, and role. This will be recorded and it will be posted in the private YouTube channel. So a little bit about what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about looking back to look forward. So what that is going to entail is essentially how do we do a review of past election seasons, what our fundraising campaigns were, and how do we assess our success with those, and how that will help inform goal setting for current fundraising heading into this year. Some unique characteristics about this coming election season and how that may affect fundraising. We'll also, in the previous section, take a look at some unique characteristics of the previous um, national elections that had specific things that would dictate, fundraising and frameworks for philanthropic giving. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. We'll talk about storytelling, strategy, and calendaring. And then we'll try and leave some time for some Q&A towards the end. Sound good? Great. Um, so to start us off with, the probably not the easiest question to answer, but before we get started, how are you all feeling heading into this election season coming in November? Overwhelmed? Very real. I hear some giggles out there. I hear some sighs. Concerned. Okay, yeah. Nervous, attacked. Yep. Determined. Great. Okay, cool. So it seems like let's yeah, depends on the day. Let's frame all of this as like cautious optimism, right? We're gonna hope for the worst, but or hope for the best actually, but be prepared for suboptimal conditions. Let's put it that way. Um, so to be able to like really think about what fundraising is going to look like for 2024, I want us to take a look at what it looked like in 2020 and 2022 and give you all the tools to be able to do that for your own organizations as well. So we'll talk about this kind of at a bird's eye level view, but you can take some of these ideas and think about how to apply this to your own fundraising teams and the work that you've done in the past. Um, First off is to get as much information as you can from your prior strategies. Um, as a former grant writer myself, I know that fundraising departments normally have very high levels of turnover. So maybe you weren't at your organization for the 2020 election or maybe even the 2022 election. But if you can, try and gather a sense of what strategy was like at those times, what you've done in the past, and what benchmarks you can use based on that information to goal set. And so the things that you really want to take a look at are direct solicitations, of course. So what from your fundraising team actually went out direct to folks during this season that was centered around fundraising in your organization. Things to take a look out for are framing and tone, maybe certain programming that you really wanted to highlight at the time, or even how folks really connected with your work. And that extends beyond just direct solicitation. You should also look at all forms of external messaging. In an ideal scenario, your external messaging will have some sort of theme to it. So no matter whether I'm reading this on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, I'm getting an email from you, I'm getting a direct solicitation from you, they should all be messaging around the same thing and have around the same voice, right? So get a sense of whether your org has been able to accomplish that in the past, because that might mean that you didn't do the best job in carrying effective messaging, which may have affected your fundraising potential. Then you're going to want any data that you can get on actual gifts. So what fundraising streams did you invest in? So whether that's individual giving in some sense, maybe institutional giving, like you wrote more grants or connected for additional funding from your foundation partners, or any forms of independent revenue generation. Maybe you started a merch line, maybe you did events, anything like that that also brought money in. Take a big overlook at that time of what you raised that year. And those 2 years, we'll use 2020 and 2022 as benchmarks to figure out what was, a baseline for your organization. And then also something to really look at too is your donor-based growth. So we want to look at growth in two different ways. We want to look at how many new donors did we bring in during this time. So that is going to measure how effective our messaging was. And then we also want to see of our current donor base, did people give more or did people give again? So if there was an increased frequency or increased amount of gift, that means our messaging was really strong with our current base of donors as well. So these are different benchmarks that we can look at just to get a bird's eye view of what we did in the past, how successful it was, and things that we may want to look at potentially changing. Um, so once we have those, we're going to use those baseline results to develop fundraising tactics for this upcoming year. Things that we want to focus on are potential targeted communications and asks. So heading into this, we're starting now in May/June, so we have enough time to think through, instead of doing just a one size fits all communication strategy, are there different angles that we want to pursue with different types of funders, right? So is there mass messaging that we want to get out that is based on our theme for our grassroots funders? Are there targeted things that we want to do with our major donors or different ways of engaging them ahead of the election, so that they're activated and they're ready to give more? Is there recurring donor programs that we want to introduce or really strengthen during this time? Are there conversations that we want to have with institutional funders ahead of the debates and ahead of the election to ensure that, our focus area is still in alignment with their goals and what they're thinking and what's happening in philanthropy at large, right? So all of those different focus groups are going to require different touches and different styles of engagement. So thinking through who we want to fundraise from and what is our messaging to them um, is going to be the way to go forward. Also, we just in general have way more tools in our toolbox as fundraisers in 2024 than we did in 2020. So things that have come to the forefront are, for instance, text to give technology, which is now a lot more prevalent for folks. So doing a texting campaign is a lot more acceptable for regular nonprofits than it was 4 years ago. Um, Including QR codes on giving that link directly to your giving page, right? A few years ago, I can tell you none of my aunts and uncles would probably be able to scan a QR code, but post-pandemic, that's just an ingrained form of technology now. So there are different shifts that have happened in the past few years. So think about what you can do to really take advantage of those to make fundraising easier for you. Um, and then ultimately, we really want to develop effective strategies on how do we increase our base. So this is going to be our base of donors, but also the people in our ecosystem. So maybe you don't give during the election, but you now are signed up to our newsletter and I can reach out to you on Giving Tuesday, or I can reach out to you for end of year giving. So there are a bunch of different ways that we really want to bring people into our circle and figure out how we can convert them from people who are interested maybe solely on an issue or a focus area to folks who are actually going to donate to our organization and be supporters. And so how we're going to look at this is really by thinking through, successes and challenges from prior years. So we're going to highlight wins from our former strategy. So things that we did really well, things that we, thought we knocked out of the park, whether you did it yourself or, folks who may have been at the org at the time can speak to, use what's working and figure out how to double down and go one step further or deeper than that and think through again, what are the new capacities that you have at hand that you didn't have in 2022 to do this or 2020? So that might be more staff available. So you have more people power, whether that's employees, volunteers, board members who are ready to engage in fundraising, different assets. So maybe you have improved communications systems and tools or better language to be able to share. Technology we talked about before, whether that is, the text giving tools, QR codes, email solicitation tools, social media, you invested maybe in a CRM or a database. Any of those are different perks that you can use to really advance your capacity and also process. So what we're doing right now is a form of building that capacity, right? Thinking through what are some different processes that we can use so it's not just an ad hoc, like, oh, an election's coming up, we should send a couple emails about that and see how people feel, to we know this is happening months in advance. We're going to set our strategy 2 quarters in advance to be ready for that. And we already know how we're going to launch our program, where we're going to pivot to if we need to, and all the steps that we'll take. And then think through, in addition to that, any prior challenges that may have existed. So were there gaps that stopped your prior campaigns from achieving the success that you wanted? Where did those campaigns fall short? Where among maybe the 4 capacities that we talked about earlier, you didn't have those to be able to enact your campaign the way that you ideally wanted. Figure out based on your baseline now, what are some new expectations that you can set up, right? Maybe your donor base has grown in the past 4 years since 2020. If that's the case, what does success look like for you now? Are you looking to raise more money just as a flat rate? Are you aiming to raise more money proportional to the size of your donor base? Are you aiming to grow the size of each gift? There are multiple different ways that you can set out strategies of how you can target success. And then just in general, And this goes for this programming or any sort of capacity building work that you want to do. I highly suggest adopting the snowball method. So thinking about what is the smallest, most impactful change that you can make, in addition to the work that you already do or have done, implement that and measure that success. And then once you go from there, you can implement something else. And then over time, you will build, the program of your dreams that you really want to build, right? And that's a great reason to start now and start thinking about this now. If you're in October and you're trying to build a whole fundraising campaign around the election, it might be too late. You might not have enough capacity team-wise to think through everything, to roll everything out, to build all the tools. But if you can do one thing this week and one thing next week, by the time it's time to launch in September, October, you're going to be good to go. You'll have done the groundwork and set up your systems already so that you can have everything that you need ahead of time. Great. So now that we've set baselines, let's talk about what actually happened in those two election years um, that will have influenced giving during those times. Putting together these two slides gave me a headache because it reminded me how much we've lived through in the last 4 years. But yeah, so in 2020, we were still knee deep in the pandemic. This was not only a huge societal change for the health and safety implications, but also we saw an increase in the social safety net in this country and shifting in what Americans felt was the baseline of support that a government or a society should be providing for them. We also simultaneously had the Black Lives Matter movement, which was a huge global reckoning with systemic racism that also created a flood of giving towards the philanthropic sector to help address this. The same as with the pandemic, we saw a ton of rapid response giving, a lot of priority shift from foundations as well. We're also dealing with a recession that was caused by, you know, the world shutting down, and tons of economic uncertainty. In addition to that, rising cost of living, which really threw individual giving a little bit out of whack. And then on top of all of that, uh, we had to deal with issues with the democracy heading into and post the election. And the emphasis on that also had very large implications on giving, especially politically motivated giving, depending on who you were as an organization. So these are some things that may have spurned or may have made giving harder for your organization. And the reason why we bring these up is that, as much as it is easy to repeat things as a fundraiser and build off of what we've done in the past, there are going to always be some unique characteristics based on time, history, things that we're talking about that affect our giving. So what we want to be able to do is to remember and recognize that these things were happening. And so we can look at the 2020 numbers, not just as pure numbers, but understand the context that they were happening in. So if 2020 was a huge outlier, but you were a civil rights organization working under the Black Lives Matter time, like it would make sense that you would have a outsized level of giving in 2020. And then you can look at your numbers in 2021, 2, and 3 and say, did we sustain that? Was that repeatable? Was that just a blip, right? So you don't want to make benchmark numbers that aren't really rooted in the full context of who you are as an organization. So that's why all of this is important. Right. Heading into 2022, um, inflation increases, cost of living made life rapidly unaffordable for a lot of folks. This affected a lot of individual giving campaigns, and we're still seeing that effect at a large scale. That individual giving The amount of donors is increasing, but the size of the gift is decreasing. So what that means is people have less wiggle room in their pockets and less ability to give. Um, Saw the fall of Roe, and abortion rights become a huge uh, topic and issue in this country, which spurned a lot of individual giving to reproductive rights and women's rights organizations. Um, we also saw, this was the first election post January 6th. So there was the first opportunity for Americans to vote post-insurrection. And so figuring out what the political climate was at that time and being able to respond to that in both ways was something that was new for the country. And all of this, again, affects giving levels, affects the types of organizations that folks choose to give to and their ability to give overall. Any questions about that before we jump into the current landscape that we're at today? If you have a question, you can throw a hand up, just come off mute, type it in the chat, whatever works best. No? Okay. So let's talk about where we are now in 2024 after all that. From a purely candidate driven analysis, 2024 is a repeat of 2020. The presidential candidates are the same, and polling has shown a high level of apathy across the board um, for both candidates. And so this has affected philanthropy as well. We've seen, the normal levels of get out the vote, activation and mobilization that we normally would see in the primary season for for organizations that are working in either voter access or voter rights, or even hot topic, high button issues, whether we're talking about immigration, uh, education, things of that nature. We haven't really seen that mobilization this year because the picture has just been a lot murkier. At the same time, from an institutional standpoint, the foundations haven't really been as clear on what the vision going forward is, which has affected the levels of institutional giving that we've seen. This is purely anecdotal from what I've seen in the field, but please let me know in the chat if you all have seen this too. But I don't think I've, in my entire career as a fundraiser, seen as many organizations going through a strategic redesign or not accepting open proposals as I have over the past 12 months. And I don't feel that's coincidental. I feel like everyone is still trying to figure out what is going on, where is our focus need to be, and what challenges are we really focused on trying to solve over the next coming years. In addition to what we are seeing at the presidential level, Congress has been largely ineffective. So Congress has only passed 34 bills this past calendar year, January to January, which is the lowest amount since the Great Depression. We are in a state of political gridlock, which has caused a lack of leadership and trust. And so what that trickles down to is for organizations who work on getting policy passed, who work on being able to create mass change that we want to see in our organization. That apathy of being able to feel like we can get things done trickles down to our work, because our work is ultimately, in many cases, going to be dependent on some law getting passed or some bill getting drafted. Um, and so we have to be cognizant of these things when we talk about our fundraising messages and how we speak about our work. There is also the disassociation of young and BIPOC voters. So we have seen in polling numbers, that there is, due to a lot of the political stagnation, um, a lack of progress on issues that are important to millennials and younger folks, whether we are talking about student loan forgiveness, healthcare, abortion rights, police reform, ending support for war, climate change. Um, those are things that have seen incremental progress over the past few years. In some cases, not much progress at all. And so again, that feeds into the apathy. And so part of our messaging is going to have to be figuring out how to address folks who are disassociated and give them space to connect with work again. And then finally, a desire for change. And we'll share these slides so you can click on the links and check out these articles. But in general, nearly 70% of voters polled say that America's political and economic systems need major change or even to be torn down entirely. And so while it is very obvious that like America as a whole does not fully agree on what type of change is needed, people are clamoring for change, which means that folks are looking for ways to feel activated to take control of the situations in their life and to have a home politically and socially and ways for them to engage with things that matter to them. So despite all of the negativity that I unfortunately put in the previous slides, this is a sign of hope that people haven't fully given up because they are clamoring for change. They just don't know what it is. And I think for a lot of organizations, it is our job to be able to give folks that home, to be able to find a way to engage in causes that they personally care about. And one of the easiest and most effective ways of doing that is being a donor. Um, Felicia, yeah, we'll send along the slides and the links are live in the slides. I believe this poll came from the New York Times, if I remember this one correctly, but we'll definitely share that along. Great. Um, and then democracy is under threat again, right? So this election will have some very real consequences. Regardless of who wins, it is likely that Supreme Court members are going to retire within the upcoming term, which will allow a president the ability to solidify the makeup of the bench for the next generation. There have also been threats of political violence and retribution depending on election results. So we're very much not out of the woods yet. Sierra, as a nonprofit, a lot of funders ask us not to be political in order to apply for funds, or we could lose the funds. How do we organizations navigate this? So there are two ways. Beth, your way is also right. You can create a C4 arm where you can talk about things very directly in a political sense. The difference between the C3 and C4 is your ability to speak about specific legislation or candidates or political parties or anything of that nature directly by name, right? But as a C3, you can still do political education and you can still frame what's happening in the world around your work. You just can't say, a political party, a political candidate, the name of some sort of policy, but you can refer to them. So, for instance, if you were an organization that is focused on climate change, right? You couldn't necessarily name a bill in Congress that would, create an effect for climate change positively, but you can speak to the levels of political apathy around climate, the fact that things aren't getting done, and you can speak to the changes that you would like to see, as long as they're not framed within a specific form of legislation. So it's really nuanced, and funders do have different levels of comfortability about how you toe that line. So it's definitely something that you can play around with. And yes, you do have the ability to do some legislative lobbying. It's it's based on, the financial splits of how you do that. But I do know that even though you do have the capacity to do so as a 501(c)(3), oftentimes 501(c)(3)s who do that can come under IRS scrutiny a little bit because it's about the split and percentage of money you spend, and it makes institutional funders oftentimes a little skittish when C3s do legislative lobbying. That's just my anecdotal, um, you know, knowledge of what I've seen. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of where we are right now, and what we are facing. So let's talk about what we're going to do about that and how that relates to fundraising. So we're going to start with storytelling. So as I was saying before, we're living in really messy times and people are looking for leadership. As we see, people don't believe in the leaders or political spaces that are given to them, but they are looking for new ones. And so as organizations, we can help provide that for them. Regardless of what you do and what you focus on, whether you are a very obviously political organization or you're not. There is some ways that this election will tangentially affect your work. And so being able to give people the home and the education that they need and the understanding of the issues and what's important, and to build power and build community, is a great space for organizations to be in. And we should look at this not as a threat, but as an opportunity, that folks are willing to engage. We just have to find them and get them through the door. As I said, being a donor is the easiest way to get people in. And you can be so much more than that after you start with that. So we want to give people a home through our messaging. Our messaging wants to help find potential donors, make them understand that we are in alignment, and we support what they support, and to give them a home and a way for them to get involved. And it really is a way for everyone to figure out what is their space. So everyone can be involved in whatever work in their own way. Not everyone is going to go to a protest. Not everyone is going to be a full-fledged member in a movement. But donors are just as important. Figuring out how to uplift uh, the potential for donors to make progress is so important. And so what we need to do is think about them not only just as a donor, but the same way that we review anyone who connects with our organization, and give them deep levels of engagement and things for them to latch onto. Because again, we don't want one-time donors. We want folks who are gonna understand the level of the work and continue to invest in our organizations for the long haul. And we need to give them reasons to do that. So this should just be the precursor to that. Um, and so because this election is a little hard to predict, the structure of this going forward is going to be really around scenario. Uh, so we'll talk about what we can do in positive atmosphere scenarios. So we got the result that we may have wanted, negative scenarios, as well as if it's a mixed bag. So again, in the beginning, I talked about the need for storytelling to really carry out throughout all of your messaging. And so what we're thinking about here are themes. So what are the stories that we want to tell? So positive atmosphere. So heading into the election, we want to talk about building momentum. So our focus is uplifting our organization's work and connecting it to the larger themes that are happening. So the catch should be, if you care about XYZ issue, you should support our organization, and this is why. That is what you want folks to really understand. And there are going to be pivotal moments, especially around certain focus areas, as the debates come up, as the news lifts up certain topics. That there are going to be pivotal times where you should have messaging ready to be able to add to that theme of uplifting who you are as an organization, how you connect to the larger issues that the country is looking at, and what is your role in creating change. Um, so that is the early framework and language. It is now election season, so we're mid-election, right? This is September, October, first stages of November. Um, and what we're going to talk about is cautious optimism. We're going to give donors a feeling of joining a movement for change. So we really want to frame our work with the upcoming election and using it as a strong time-bound frame to give donors a reason to donate right now and to point to direct effects. So the messaging that should come across during this time is that it is important to give right now. This is the work that we do. This is a space where you would use something similar to what some people call like the feed the children model, where it's like $1 a day feeds a child, right? Um, that framework or that that way of explaining donations puts in a donor's mind a very concrete idea of donating directly to a constituency. So whether you are a museum and you say donating XYZ gets 10 kids into the museum for free, or you're a direct service organization that says, $100 allows us to feed XYZ people or to provide ABC service. Whatever the case is, it allows the donor to feel empowered that they are giving directly to the cause, right? So the messaging is really to help folks again. The election is coming up. People are feeling all the feelings that we named before, but amplified, right? We want to give them a space where they can do something about it. So we first talked about this is why we're important, and now we're giving them a reason like donate now, work with us now. This is the change that we want to see. Um, and that is the framework we want to operate with. And we're going to actually continue that post-election. Oftentimes, whether it's an election, whether it is a huge policy win, whether it's a huge social win. There can be victory fatigue. Um, I was working in environmental work a few years ago, and when the IRA got passed, everyone said, "Woo, all right, there we go, climate change done. We do not have to worry about this for another 10 years." Which is far from the case, right? There is implementation to go through. There is, bills are often unperfect. And so but a lot of people felt that at the time, because it literally was a win and the biggest piece of climate legislation that this country ever passed, that there was no more attention needed to be paid to climate. And so fundraising really suffered at that time. So we have to be cognizant that there can be some slippage after a big win. And this applies outside of just elections, any type of big policy win. So what we really want to do is carry on that message that this is just a fight that's just now getting started. They have to remain engaged. This is when you would talk about new levels of programming, where you're taking the work and how you need them to carry along with you as donors to support this new era of the work that you're doing, right? So that's positive framework. Um, let's switch to the antithesis of that. Um, so we're gonna talk about holding the line. So if things are not going well, what we really want is for people to feel that they can connect to the work to protect what we have. And so why supporting organizations is still important despite the negative news that they may see or the apathy that they may be feeling or feeling like, this political system just doesn't work for me. So why should I engage at all, right? We want to say, no, this is why this is important. This is the work that we're doing on the ground, and we are still effective regardless of whatever is happening. And so that is the framework we want to operate with to get people to invest in the work. Mid-election, we want to talk about community building. So we want to show donors again, with a model of direct service to a constituency, that we can maintain whatever progress and goals that we have if we look inward. Oftentimes we are in negative atmospheres going to see a shrinking of dollars. So whether that's from institutions, from the government, from corporate sponsors. So organizations oftentimes have to turn to individual donors to kind of support themselves, and that can build a camaraderie and level in between. Um, Alia, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asked, are we the ones determining whether we use a positive or negative atmosphere, or is the idea that what is happening around us dictates that? That's a great question. So this is framed as like what is happening in the world and what is the general sense around like what you're hearing. So it's not that you want to dictate the positive or negative atmosphere. We should, as fundraisers, always be positive, but if people are feeling negative, right? So if there's a negative atmosphere among donors of like, this is futile, why are we even getting involved? Things of that nature. Um, that is what you want to frame it around. So we really want to be able to give people at this time at this negative time a reason to continue to donate or to get engaged. Hope that answers your question. Um, But yeah, the post-election theme, it if there's a negative atmosphere, is righteous anger. So after a loss, after a quote unquote failure, donors or potential donors can often feel frustrated and they're looking for ways to channel their indignation, to get involved. So frame messaging at this time around giving them an outlet to get involved. Um, and so also to that earlier point, this can change, right? So we can be in a negative atmosphere pre-election and then a positive atmosphere mid-election and then a mixed bag post-election, right? These are just different markers for like where we are. Um, I guess I'm trying to, Ali, I'm answering your question. I guess I'm trying to imagine when a positive atmosphere would be happening in this environment. That is a great point. This is supposed to be used under any circumstance. Um, but right now I get that sentiment. But again, we are in a time that news can change very rapidly. I guarantee you that in 2 months' time, they are not the political situation that we're in right now is not going to look exactly the same as it is right now, as it will in like July. Things change very rapidly. And so we just want to be aware of all scenarios, and so we can be able to invest in that. Felicia, I'm not sure I am getting your comment. Could you say a little bit more?
It was supposed to be a little more cynical, like
Oh.
positive. Positive is knowing who your enemies are. I don't know.
Uh-huh, 100%. But again, there are going to be scenarios there that are going to play out in the public that are going to be spaces where our organizations can latch onto. We also have to remember, like, we are intimately connected to our work because we care about it and we live it every single day, right? The average citizen may not be thinking about climate change every day, may not be thinking about um any of the focus immigration every day unless you like live it, right? But the election season gives a chance for us to have nationwide conversations around specific topics that like don't necessarily come up, right? So this is a way for us to be prepared for when it's our time to shine, when we are in the spotlight, we're ready to go with messaging, or we can grab people and get them when they're talking about our work. And then sorry. Let's talk about a mixed bag. So pre-election, we're trying to find tangential connections. So election results may look kind of murky. This might be where we are right now. We want to focus the work of our organization and tie it loosely to national conversation. So again, debates are coming up. They're happening earlier this year, I believe in June. Um, and so we're going to have an opportunity based on what's happening in a debate for us to be able to latch on to things that candidates say and
At
able to frame
6:30 or
things
whatever this webinar
strongly.
website.
So I think that that's a great time for that. Mid-election, we're going to focus on mobilizing around our focus area. So we're going to speak to folks who may be potentially apathetic towards the election itself, but care deeply around issues to vote with their wallet. So giving them, again, a chance for folks to still remain engaged, even if they aren't fully engaging in the political process. And then post-election theme is what we really want to focus on is creating a new North Star. So you can use your organization's North Star to describe where your org is going, because again, it's going to be kind of messy out there. People aren't going to know what is going to happen in the future. And in times like that, they're going to be looking for that leadership. And that's where your organization can step in to say, this is where we're going. This is the work that we want to do. And this is how this is going to create change and better people's lives. All right. Any questions about that before we jump into strat? Okay, let's talk about strategy. So this is going to be a very comms dependent framework for fundraising. Uh, Oftentimes communications and fundraising are connected but not intertwined. It's going to be incredibly important during election seasons to make sure that they are intertwined. You want to make sure that the themes that we're talking about from a fundraising standpoint link up to the themes that your comms team is talking about from a communication standpoint. So that no matter when folks engage with your organization, they're going to understand where you stand on your focus issue, the work that you're doing, and how folks can get involved, and using that as a funnel to bring people in to be a donor. Um, that is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. Um, Next, we're going to figure out the segmentation. So again, breaking down our target demographics. Who are we going to talk to? What message are they going to get? And when are they going to get that message? How do we structure our communications so that we can carry this theme and messaging through the entirety of the rest of the calendar year into 2025? And then finally, thinking specifically around major donors and funders, getting ahead of the panic and the rush, right? So political upheaval, lots of things going on. This can change funder minds very rapidly. So you want to make sure that your major donors is still aligned with you, your framework for change, and how you're analyzing the political situation. And oftentimes, funders are looking to the groups on the ground to inform them about decisions that they should be making. Be proactive in that sense. Reach out to your institutional fundraisers, reach out to your major donors, let them know what your plans are, what the work is that you're going to be doing from now to the end of the year and ahead, so that they can feel confidence that A, they should listen to you, and B, they should continue to invest in you because you have the answers. And you will stay front of mind as one of their partners to continue to invest in. Um, During the election, our strategy should be outreach. So we want to expand our network and the people who know our organization's name as much as possible. So we want to not only connect with our current donors, but we want to build as big an ecosystem of potential new donors as we can. Um, there are many different ways that we can do that. But again, a lot of this is going to rely on tight synergy with your communications team. Um, One of the things that you really want to work on ahead of the election is bolstering your welcome series. So your welcome series is however folks engage with your organization for the first time. Say I sign up for your email list or I sign up for your newsletter. There should be a series of emails that go out after that sign up that lets me know about the organization, lets me know about the work that y'all do, and then eventually has some call to order or some call to action. Whether that is sign a petition, whether that is become a member. But in your case, as a fundraising department, it'll probably be to donate to the organization. Um, so we want to be able to convert folks who are coming across our organization for the first time into followers and into donors. So folks who are coming to the website, they should have a pop-up that, brings them into a welcome series or at least gets them to sign up for your newsletter. Social media followers, we should, if you have the ability to manage that, have a series of scripted DMs or private messages that go out to folks who follow. Thank you for the follow. Sign up for our newsletter here, etc. We want to build all of this in ahead of time so it can be as automated as possible. And then finally, outwardly, what we want to do is establish expert status. So we want to increase our visibility on our focus area by becoming an established expert in our focus area. So if there are op-ed opportunities, if there are panels that you can be on in conferences, anything that your organization can do to show why you are important across your focus area is going to amplify your profile. And ahead of the election, when the spotlight starts shining on your area of work, you will be now at a higher level. Um, Felicia asked if there are any good welcome series examples that people have. We're reworking this at the moment. Would love to hear from the group if they have any examples of welcome series they use. We have a template in-house that we can share as well, Felicia, but definitely want to encourage folks to, share the knowledge that they've developed over time. Right. Um, so we're gonna talk about strategy and the different scenarios. So again, positive, we got what we wanted. Um, but we want to negate that victory syndrome. This is a great time to announce new programming, new ways for donors to get involved, ask them to donate, to start something new, to keep the momentum going. Um, and think through deepening connections with your donor base through independent revenue generation. This is a great time to introduce new ways of getting folks into your organizational life cycle, as we like to call it. So figuring out what are different deeper levels of communication that we can have with them. Is this a great time for a recurring giving program, for a membership program, for merch? There are a ton of different ways that you can engage with folks. Um, when you have that big win and people are feeling really good and want to um continue developing programming around that. So say things did not go our way. We really want to harness that anger. So we want to give donors the chance to invest in you while they're upset with a strong communications blitz. Market yourself as a leader. Prove concretely why you're pushing back against whatever the election results may say. What are we going to do to fight this? How can people get involved? How can they volunteer? How can they donate? Things of that nature. And then we're also going to look for increased funding opportunities. It is very likely that philanthropy, major donors will look to fund strategies to weaken the effects of a lost election and to continue to promote their agenda. So start having conversations with institutional funders, sorry, now, to be able to facilitate those asks post-election, regardless of what happens. So you're well equipped to showcase yourself as a leader in your focus area and how you can connect with them. Um, And then mixed results. So we want to focus on messaging, increase comms, and try and reach as many new donors as we can. Think about our welcome series and ensure that we have a strong funnel. And then we also want to focus on IRG. Chances are, if there are mixed results, there's going to be a lack of centralized vision for institutional fundraising, which can cause a bit of a budget gap for organizations. So if we can proactively think of how we can generate revenue as an organization to be able to blunt some of these shifting funding priorities and how they affect your bottom line, it'll give you an opportunity to, remain firm and then also have a deeper individual donor base for you to continue to engage with. Yep, that's correct, Felicia. Sorry about the acronym. We use IRG like all the time internally. So internal revenue generation is any form of fundraising that is outside of institutional sourcing, right? So it's a people-driven form of fundraising that can be anything from events to fee-for-service work to merch lines to training programs to recurring giving to membership, anything that is that you as an organization are using like the assets or the knowledge that you have to create revenue for yourself. Right. So let's talk about how we want to roll this up and set ourselves up for success. So this is a roadmap to and through the election. Um, So in May, what we're really focused on is collecting and analyzing our baseline data and sharing our findings with relevant parties. By relevant parties, I mean your executive team, your board, if necessary, um, definitely your comms department, and saying this is where we were 2020, 2022, and looking at the considerations of what was going on heading into June, what we want to be able to do is set our fundraising strategy and set new goals. So if we raise XYZ in September, October, November, we're setting these new goals based on this information. And these are the themes that we want to speak about. This is how we want to frame our work. And we are going to go with this comm strategy. In July, you should really be working on finalizing your welcome series and doing that segmentation ahead of time so that you can figure out how you want to communicate with your different groups and begin developing some of that content. Um, in August, we're going to start rolling out the comms strategy and start setting those meetings with the major donors that we talked about. So your institutional funders, getting a tap on how they're feeling, your major donors getting a tap on how they're feeling, making sure that they're still invested and you can start talking about your strategy heading into the election. Um, September, we're going to continue that comm splits. We're going to start that marketing, those speaking opportunities, anything that we can bring the org into the limelight. And then we're going to think about what we heard in those major donor conversations and figure out if there are ways that we can align deeper with that, that fit within our worldview. October is the pre-election comms blitz. And then we are going to analyze our response to the pre-election that we got from donors and then adjust based on our mid-election strategy. This will also be adjusted based on the atmosphere that we're feeling, right? And then we want to prepare that mid-election comm strategy and then just ensuring that our goals are on track and being met. And then we're going to launch mid-election strategy end of October, first week of November, push solicitations, analyze how that does, pick our post-election strategy, which will probably be dictated by the results of the election, and then think about how do we link that to Giving Tuesday and to the end of the year, right? So now we're thinking about the election's done, the dust is settling, who do we want to be? And how do we connect to donors during that time and carry them straight through? And then December, what we want to do is continue with our post-election strategy, connect with our major donors and institutional donors again to see what are they thinking ahead of 2025? Are they anticipating funding shifts? Are they going to be going in different routes? This will help you uh deal with budgeting heading into 2025 a lot better, and to ensure that your messaging is connecting with the folks that you needed to. Continue to push end of year fundraising, and ensure that your fundraising funnel has enough donors to help you reach your goal. So again, through October, November, December, start thinking about independent revenue generation if you need it. Continue to connect with all of your donors and give people a reason why they should continue to support you. And again, the largest thing that I want you to take away from this is that themed messaging, right? You want to be able to carry your donor base through this election, and give them a reason to continue to believe in your org and your work regardless of what's happening in the outside world. You should be able to use that no matter what's happening to a fundraising advantage by showcasing the ability, the skill, and the capacity of your organization and why you're important. Great. And that is it from me, but wanted to leave the floor open for any questions. And we can also dive deep on if you have specifics around your organizations and things that you're thinking heading into the election. And Janet, I know we had a couple pre-sent questions, right, that we should dive into. Great. So before we get to that, I see Sierra has a hand up. So Sierra, you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure, it's kind of following up from the question I asked in the chat about, being able to be political as a nonprofit, as a 501(c)(3. And I was just wondering if there were any strategies because a lot of, or some of our programs are happening in colleges, and right now the college environment, I mean, it's the end of the year now, but has not been very trusting of nonprofits and the ability to communicate and get things done. And I was just wondering if there was any like strategies around connecting with a college audience when they feel like there's just apathy coming from a nonprofit when we can't do as much as we would like to be able to do because of our 501(c)(3) status.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think that your answer there is going to be like high levels of collaboration and trust building, um, in the sense of connecting with them and asking what are the stances and spaces that it's important for your organization to show up, and how would you like us to show up, and have them having an understanding of like what is actually feasible because of the limitations of your organization, right? And there's not, there are specific limitations to what you can do. And I think that is very fair to like uplift that, and to say, as an organization, this is like there are certain like things that we literally cannot say, or stances that we cannot take, but bringing them into the room to help build a joint statement or joint communication around something, if it if your values align, you know what I mean, and it's more about the messaging, I think will help build that trust. um Felicia, I think, is commenting too, maybe connecting them to others that might have the ability to do what they are looking to do. Yeah, that's also a good point. So, like, if you are a C3 and you can only go but so far, if you have any C4 partner groups, like, hey, we can carry the work here and amplify a message that is being sent by a C4, right? Or they can take that and run with it. So there are different ways of thinking through how to collaborate at a deeper level, that I think would be helpful there.
But with funding, if you're not allowed to like protest with funding and you're part of an organization and you're saying I'm part of this organization, but you can't protest, that can be a challenge point because
Yes.
people want to have freedom of voice. Yeah.
100%. And so I think the thing when with regarding protests, it is important to do training for any student members, that they're not representatives of the organization in their protest, right? So if I go protest in the street, I am a member of a number of organizations, right? But I am not there at the protest specifically representing an organization, right? And so that distinction may not be known to them, but that is incredibly important, because it can put funding or the organization at whole at potential jeopardy, right? And so having that level of training for those folks to be able to say, like, I'm here under my own volition as an individual, exercising my free right, and I happen to be a member of XYZ organization rather than I'm here protesting on behalf of XYZ organization, are two incredibly important distinctions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Janet, the first question was, how can we most leverage our 501(c)(4) and C3 partner organizations in support of local races? Yeah, so down again, a lot of this was focused nationally, but down ballot races are incredibly important and potentially more important, depending on where you live, to your livelihood. And so being able to work in coalition with orgs around fundraising, I think is something that is incredibly important. One thing that I would advocate and suggest is thinking through joint fundraisers or list sharing. A joint fundraiser can help alleviate the cost of throwing a fundraiser on your own and also open you up to a bunch of new donors who are politically motivated, or at least connected to your work and your focus area of work, and is a great way for you to grow your potential donor base. So if you had three groups go in on a fundraiser, you split the proceeds and the costs three ways, and you share your donor list with each other. Not only will you get the proceeds from the event, but you will potentially get additional donors from that list sharing. Um, it's something that I would really suggest going through. Becca, what would you suggest to combat donor fatigue? We're feeling that in a real way in the South. Yeah, donor fatigue is real. I think uh ways that you would want to think about combating donor fatigue would be thinking through, how can we create new experiences for donors so that um they can feel engaged with the work again. Oftentimes, because organizations don't have the most robust communications, and everyone doesn't read every single email, it can feel like the only time as a donor that you contact me is when you're hitting me up for money. And no one likes feeling like that, right? And so think through, what are some things that we can do with our donor base that will give them the opportunity to remember why this work is important, whether that is a volunteer opportunity, whether that is a membership program that increases communications, whether that's even just simply a newsletter that lets folks know what's happening in their communities, how to get engaged with you or with partner organizations. Um, there are tons of ways to keep people in the loop, and connected to your work so that you don't ask, right? And then when you do ask, they're much more likely to give. Um, so if the majority of your communications have hard asks in them, you are going to run through your donor list relatively quickly. But if you ask at strategic times of the year, whether that might be around a mass event like an election or end of year giving, or depending on your focus area, Earth Day, if you're a climate organization, Pride Month, if you are an LGBT-Q-led organization, Juneteenth, if you are a Black-led organization, right? There are certain times of the year that you can form specific asks. And if you limit your asks to those and then do strong communications throughout the year, you're going to find that people are much more likely to engage with your work and your org. Any other questions? Thank you, Janet. I knew there was another one set up. It's a nonprofit that also does issue advocacy. What types of calls to action will resonate with donor prospects in an election year? This is a great question from whoever sent it in. So if you do issue advocacy, there are a number of calls to action that you can do. Petition signing is a great one. Um, Specifically, or especially if you're like a C4 around specific bills, is a great one to do. Inviting people to take part in rallies or mass mobilization is one. If there are meetups or any form of political education, bringing folks in um, would be one that I would suggest. Any type of programming on top of the ask. So I think one thing that you can do is see through your welcome series if you can get folks to do that action. And then if they do that action, they are probably primed to make an ask, a direct ask, because they've shown an affinity for like the level of work that the organization is going through. So I think that that would be, um, those would be the ones that I think would potentially resonate with folks. Anything else? Mm. Janet, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, if nobody had any other questions, I think I was wondering, do you feel like we would have time to actually like walk through our welcome series
Yeah.
sample, or do you think that that would be best saved for the email?
Yeah. How much time do we have? Do we have a lot of time?
We have 15 minutes.
Yeah. Give me one. I'll have to find it. Let
I
me.
found it.
Oh, all right. Well, if you want to share screen, I will stop sharing and then you got it. Um, but just letting folks know on June 5th will be part two of this. We're gonna do a live case study with three organizations talking about their 2020, 2022 election fundraising and lessons learned and then what their plans are for 2024 and how they kind of follow that blueprint. Um, Great. So I can run through what the welcome series could potentially look like. So the first one is just a really basic intro to the organization. You're gonna say, thank you so much for whatever the interaction was that you had with your organization, and introduce them to take some steps. So either follow the blog, engage on social media, go to the website, sign up for the newsletter. What you want to do is get folks to get as many communication arms as you can into them for cross-pollination. So maybe I miss your email, but I'm going to see you on Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to get the email that your blog got updated, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then after that, we would go into a learn more about this organization. So this is explaining like this is actually who we are and what we do. These are some ways that we are active in your community, and then you can list like some of your highlights as an organization about some of the work that you're doing, link to your mission that might be on your website. So you're giving them a bit more information about who you are and why you're important. And then from there, we would share a personal story. So this might be a constituent that you are serving. This might be a staff member, this might be a board member, but a volunteer, basically describing in their own words what your organization does and how much it means. So now we're going to ground, um, sorry, the work that you're doing with now we're going to ground the work that you're doing with the human aspect of it. Email 4 will provide more information around what you do as an organization. So you're going to list out some statistics and some high level info that's really going to ground your organization and impact. So they're going to be able to understand the size of your work, the scale of your work, how much you do in the community. And this is where you want to put your biggest and boldest statistics. And then you're going to make that ask, join us to be a volunteer or whatever your call to action is there. Like, so for the advocacy example, sign this petition. This is something that we're working on and what will change in your neighborhood, etc. And then the final, is this the final one? Maybe. And then you're going to talk about your big wins, list your annual report, sign up for regular emails, and then finally making the ask, right? So and you don't have to do all of these steps. You can mix and match based on the information that you have at your disposal. But basically, what you really want to do is outline at a whole what your organization is and does, why you're important, how folks can get involved with you, and when you are able to do that, then when you make your ask, they can understand exactly where their dollars are going, why it's important, and what change they are going to see. So it's similar to, you know, how you would apply to a foundation. Like, just a cold LOI is gonna go so much less than like if you have a call with a program officer and then you work on you leave them a one pager and then you go to a LOI and then you write a grant. Like they're gonna have so much more information and understanding about how to support your work. And we can send copies of that along as well. But yeah, June 5th, we will be back for the case studies. Thank you all so much for joining. If you have any questions in the meantime, whether they are about the training or just about, how this could relate to your work, please feel free to email me at kafili@progressivemultiplier.fund.
Don't forget Fundraising Friday.
Yes, Fundraising Friday too, as well. Please come. I'll be doing more trainings on loads of different stuff.
That's on the 31st. And the topic is, what is the topic?
Is it
Choosing your revenue generation vendors.
Yeah. So if you ever had a question, which CRM should I use? Which email thing should I sign up for? I got you. Building a whole training around it. So please come to that as well. But thank you all so much.
Oh, and then our CRM training on the 5th.
Yes. Yes, and we have our own CRM training on the 5th as well. All the databases.
All the trainings.
Thanks, y'all. Ooh, how do we sign up?
Michelle, it should have gone out through Resilience Initiative. If you have any questions, ping Michelle, but I'll include all of that information in the follow-up email.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jerry.
Sherry.